Have you ever felt the exact moment your soul is ripped in half? Not by the sharp blade of a sworn enemy, but by the deceitful hands of the very person who swore to protect you until the end of time. Imagine standing before the one the universe itself destined you to love, only to look into their eyes and realize their heart is a hollow cavern of venom, political ambition, and monstrous lies. In the brutal, primal world of shapeshifters, the severance of a fated mate bond is not just a heartbreak, it is an excruciating physical death sentence. Yet, on a morning so cold it could freeze the breath in your lungs, a devoted Luna was not just sentenced to die. She was publicly annihilated, stripped of her dignity by a fabrication so utterly sickening it makes you question if true love is nothing but a cruel, twisted joke played by the moon goddess. Are you ready to witness a betrayal so deep it will make your blood boil, and a subsequent rise from the ashes that will satisfy your most primal cravings for absolute justice? Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a tale of profound heartbreak, unbelievable survival, and ultimate retribution. Before we step further into the freezing winds of this journey, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support is the very fire that fuels our motivation, allowing us to bring you more captivating stories like this one in the future. Now, listen closely to the echoing silence of the Great Hall of the Silver Ridge Pack. It was a sprawling, terrifying architectural marvel carved directly into the icy, unforgiving face of the northern mountains. The air inside the hall that winter morning was frigid, but the bone-chilling cold permeating the room did not come from the howling blizzard outside. It radiated from the stone-faced wolves standing in absolute, suffocating silence along the walls. They were the pack. They were supposed to be family. And yet, in the face of the most egregious, heartless injustice, they stood as silent accomplices, choosing the safety of their own survival over the fierce loyalty that was meant to bind their bloodlines. At the center of this suffocating dread stood Alpha Damon. To the untrained eye, he looked every bit the towering, dominant werewolf leader. But true power requires a foundation of honor, and Damon's foundation was built on the shifting sands of a fragile, toxic ego. He was a leader who desperately confused fear with respect. He did not want an equal by his side, he wanted a subordinate who would shrink in his shadow. His fated mate, Evelyn, with her quiet resilience, her unwavering moral compass, and her deep, nurturing connection to the pack's most vulnerable members, was a constant, glaring reminder of the honor he lacked. To discard a fated Luna, an alpha must have grounds that the pack council cannot dispute. Driven by his relentless greed to merge his bloodline with a neighboring, wealthier pack, Damon resorted to the most cowardly weapon imaginable. He stood on the raised stone dais, his voice booming through the hall with a sickeningly rehearsed sorrow. In his hand, he clutched a parchment bearing the forged seal of the pack's chief healer. It was a medical decree declaring Evelyn barren. In the harsh, survival-driven hierarchy of their kind, the inability to produce an heir was viewed as a curse from the divine. Damon weaponized this primal fear perfectly, painting himself as the tragic, self-sacrificing leader forced to make a heartbreaking choice for the good of his people. The reaction of the pack was a masterclass in the banality of cruelty. Not a single voice was raised in defense of the woman who had spent years tending to their sick and guiding their youth. Eyes were averted, heads bowed to the stone floor. Their silence was a deafening roar of betrayal, proving that when a toxic leader cultivates an environment of fear, the moral courage of the collective is always the first casualty. If Damon expected a hysterical breakdown, he was sorely disappointed. Evelyn stood before the dais, her posture impeccably straight, her eyes reflecting the glacial ice of the mountains. She did not scream, she did not plead. In that agonizing, earth-shattering moment, the illusion of her life violently shattered. She realized the man she loved was nothing more than a coward hiding behind a piece of fraudulent paper. With a tragic, mesmerizing grace that made the breath catch in the throats of the onlookers, Evelyn reached up and removed the heavy silver circlet from her brow. She didn't hand it to him, she let it drop. The sharp, unmistakable clang of silver striking the cold stone reverberated through the hall, a sound that would echo in their nightmares for years to come. Her silence was a profound indictment. Turning her back on the Alpha, and the family that had forsaken her, she walked toward the heavy oak doors, stepping proudly into the jaws of a deadly winter storm. As the heavy oak doors of the Silver Ridge Hall slammed shut behind her, Evelyn stepped out of the tomb of her past and into the blinding, freezing fury of a world that wanted her dead. The severing of a fated mate bond is not a quiet affair within the body, it is a violent, tearing sensation, as if an invisible hook has been anchored deep within your chest, pulling your life force out inch by agonizing inch. With every step she took away from the territory she had spent her life nurturing, a fresh wave of excruciating pain washed over her, dropping her to her knees in the accumulating snow. The blizzard roared around her like a chorus of screaming specters, the wind slicing through her thin garments, but the physical cold was entirely eclipsed by the glacial void where her mate bond used to reside. She coughed, drops of crimson staining the pristine white snow beneath her, a stark, undeniable testament to her rapid deterioration. You see, when a wolf is rejected by their fated mate, their inner wolf usually goes mad with grief, curling up to die in the recesses of the mind. But Evelyn's wolf was different. She was weeping, yes, but beneath the sorrow was a low, guttural growl of pure indignation. It was this quiet defiance that forced Evelyn to stand up, dragging her boots through the waist-deep drifts. She refused to let her story end as a frozen corpse, a mere footnote in Alpha Damon's pathetic legacy of lies. For hours, she pushed through the treacherous mountain pass, driven by a primal instinct to survive, until her physical vessel simply could not sustain the monumental effort. Her vision blurred, the world dissolving into a canvas of blinding white and suffocating gray, and as her body finally collapsed against the roots of an ancient pine, she closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer to the moon goddess. But the goddess, it seems, was not finished with her. Just as the creeping lethargy of hypothermia began to sing its seductive lullaby, the snow beneath Evelyn vibrated with the rhythmic thud of massive paws. Out of the blinding squall emerged a creature of absolute nightmares and breathtaking majesty. He was an alpha, but not merely by title. He was a Lycan of the old blood, a myth whispered about around campfires to frighten unruly pups. His fur was the color of a starless midnight, contrasting violently with the blizzard, and his eyes glowed with an ancient, molten gold. This was Kaelen, the formidable Alpha of the Obsidian Peak, a territory so untamed and deeply respected that even the Alpha King thought twice before crossing its borders. Kaelen had been patrolling his borders, drawn by a scent that had suddenly pierced the metallic smell of the incoming storm, a scent of rain-washed pine, vanilla, and overwhelming tragedy. When he found her half buried in the snow, her life force flickering like a dying candle in a hurricane, something profound and world-shattering shifted within him. The universe, in its infinite mysterious wisdom, does not make mistakes, even when it appears to be playing cruel jokes. The moment Kaelen's golden eyes locked onto Evelyn's pale, unconscious form, the dormant, fiercely protective soul of his inner beast roared to life. He did not smell a barren, rejected Luna. He smelled the other half of his soul. With a gentleness that entirely contradicted his monstrous, terrifying exterior, Kaelen shifted into his human form, uncaring of the biting frost against his bare skin. He gathered Evelyn's fragile body into his massive, scarred arms, wrapping her in his own thick fur cloak. The moment his skin touched hers, a desperate electric spark leaped between them. It was a second-chance mate bond, a phenomenon so exceedingly rare it was considered a holy myth. This bond did not demand submission or spark immediate obsession. It poured pure, unadulterated healing magic straight into Evelyn's dying veins. Holding her tightly against his chest to share his core heat, Kaelen turned his face to the howling wind and began the long trek back to his fortress. He did not know her name, nor did he know the architect of her destruction, but as he looked down at her tear-stained, frost-bitten face, Kaelen made a silent, unbreakable vow to the heavens. Whoever had shattered this magnificent woman would pay with their territory, their crown, and their blood. Waking from the icy grip of near death, Evelyn found herself not in the afterlife, but enveloped in a warmth that began to stitch the shattered fragments of her soul back together. She opened her eyes to a room bathed in the soft golden glow of a crackling hearth, the scent of burning cedar and sage filling her lungs. She was buried beneath layers of heavy, luxurious furs, her body aching with the phantom pains of her severed bond, yet remarkably alive. Panic, the natural reflex of a hunted animal, flared in her chest for a fleeting second, but it was immediately quelled by a deep, resonant hum radiating from the doorway. There stood Kaelen, fully dressed in dark leathers, his imposing frame taking up the entire doorframe. His golden eyes held no pity, no arrogance, and absolutely no expectation, only a quiet, steadfast reverence that Evelyn had never experienced in her entire life. The healing process was not an overnight miracle of fairy tales. It was a grueling, intimate journey of unlearning the toxic lies Damon had spent years feeding her. In the Obsidian Peak pack, Evelyn was not viewed as a broken, rejected Luna. Under Kaelen's fiercely protective but endlessly patient watch, she was treated as an honored guest, and soon, as something infinitely more. She watched how Kaelen ruled his people. There was no posturing, no fragile ego demanding constant validation. He led from the front, ate with his lowest-ranking warriors, and listened to the elders with genuine respect. True power, Evelyn realized with awe, was utterly silent. It did not need to scream to be heard. As weeks turned into months, the tentative spark between Evelyn and Kaelen grew into a roaring, unquenchable inferno. This new mate bond was vastly different from the one she had shared with Damon. The first bond had felt like destiny forcing her hand, a biological imperative that demanded she compromise her own spirit to fit a predetermined mold. But with Kaelen, the bond was a choice made every single day. He encouraged her to speak, to strategize, and to heal his pack members with her extensive herbal knowledge. She wasn't standing behind him, he constantly made space for her to stand beside him. The most profound revelation of her awakening came on a crisp spring morning, brought forth by the Obsidian Peak's ancient blind seer. During a routine check on Evelyn's recovering spiritual core, the seer placed her trembling hands on Evelyn's lower abdomen and smiled, tears leaking from her clouded eyes. The devastating decree that had been Evelyn's public death sentence, her supposed barrenness, was completely exposed as the insidious lie it was. Evelyn was perfectly, vibrantly healthy. The tragic irony was that Damon's toxic, possessive aura had actually suppressed her inner wolf's fertility, a natural defense mechanism of a soul refusing to bear children for a monster. When Evelyn shared this truth with Kaelen, he did not rage or throw objects. He simply pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck, his silence infinitely more deadly than any battle cry. It was in that embrace that Evelyn's transformation was completed. She was no longer the tragic, discarded Luna of Silver Ridge. The harsh winter of her soul had melted away, revealing a woman forged in the fires of absolute betrayal and tempered by the steel of a true, unconditional love. She felt her inner wolf stretch and howl, larger, faster, and more dominant than ever before. When Kaelen finally asked her, beneath the light of a full moon, to accept his mark and become the Luna of the Obsidian Peak, she did not hesitate. The bite that sealed their souls together did not hurt. It felt like a missing piece of the universe sliding flawlessly into place. The heavens themselves seemed to hold their breath as her aura exploded across the territory, bathing the dark mountains in a blinding silvery light. She was whole, she was powerful. And as she looked out over the sprawling valleys toward the south, where the Silver Ridge pack lay, a terrifyingly beautiful smile touched her lips. As the seasons turned and the snows melted into a vibrant spring, the quiet peace of Evelyn's new life was interrupted by the undeniable, intoxicating call for justice. News travels like wildfire through the clandestine networks of the werewolf world, and the whispers slipping over the mountain borders painted a grim picture of the Silver Ridge pack. Alpha Damon's grand political maneuver had spectacularly imploded. The wealthy neighboring pack he had allied with through his new mating quickly realized his incompetence. exploiting his resources and treating his people like second-class citizens. Without Evelyn's intuitive guidance and deep connection to the land, disease had spread among the pups, and morale had plummeted into a dark abyss. Damon, desperate to maintain his crumbling facade of dominance, had turned tyrannical, ruling with an iron fist that was slowly suffocating his own people. The perfect stage for retribution presented itself when the Alpha King announced the decennial Continental Summit, a mandatory gathering of all pack leaders to renew treaties and settle grievances. It was a grand, highly political spectacle held in the neutral, ancient territory of the Crystal Caverns. Kaelen, as the Alpha of the formidable Obsidian Peak, was naturally invited, bringing with him an aura of dread and respect. But this time, he would not be attending as the solitary, brooding warlord the continent knew him to be. He would be introducing his new Luna to the world. The preparation for the summit was meticulous, charged with an electric anticipation that made Evelyn's blood sing. She was not returning for petty revenge. She was returning to surgically dismantle a tyrant and free the people who had once been her family, even if they had lacked the courage to defend her. When the night of the grand banquet arrived, the massive cavern hall was alive with the murmurs of hundreds of alphas, lunas, and elite warriors. Damon was there, sitting near the middle tier of the hierarchy, looking gaunt and severely stressed, his new mate glaring at him with open disdain. He was clinging desperately to the scraps of his fading relevance. Then, the heavy crystal doors of the grand hall were thrown open by the king's royal guard, and the herald's voice boomed across the sudden, deafening silence of the cavern, presenting Alpha Kaelen of the Obsidian Peak, and his fated mate, Luna Evelyn. The reaction was cinematic in its sheer, unadulterated shock. Gasps echoed off the cavern walls. Glasses shattered as they slipped from trembling fingers. Damon shot out of his chair as if he had been struck by lightning, the blood completely draining from his face. Evelyn walked into the cavern like a descending goddess. She was draped in a gown of midnight blue silk that mirrored the colors of her new pack, adorned with silver accents that caught the torchlight. But it wasn't the dress that commanded the room, it was the suffocating, immense pressure of her spiritual aura. She was radiating an ancient, absolute power, her chin held high, her eyes locking onto Damon with the detached curiosity of a predator observing a trapped rat. Beside her, Kaelen moved with lethal grace, his hand resting securely on the small of her back, his golden eyes sweeping the room and silently daring anyone to utter a single word of disrespect. As they glided down the grand staircase toward the Alpha King's high table, they had to pass directly by the Silver Ridge delegation. The members of her former pack, the very people who had stared at the floor while she was banished to die, now fell to their knees involuntarily, forced down by the sheer dominance of her new alpha presence. Damon stood paralyzed, his jaw unhinged, his mind unable to comprehend the impossible reality before him. He had convinced himself she had frozen to death in the mountains. Yet here she was, standing at the pinnacle of werewolf society, bound to a man whose shadow alone could swallow Damon whole. The humiliation in his eyes was a rich, intoxicating wine, but Evelyn did not even pause to gloat. She walked past him as if he were nothing more than an unpleasant draft of wind, taking her rightful seat at the right hand of true power, ready to deliver the final crushing blow. The moment their eyes met across the crowded summit hall, the ghosts of the past were instantly dragged into the unforgiving light of the present. Damon, driven entirely mad by the public destruction of his pride, and the impossible sight of the woman he had discarded sitting above him in rank, lost the last shred of his political composure. In the middle of the Alpha King's opening address, Damon stepped out of line, his face flushed with frantic, desperate rage. He pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn, his voice cracking as he accused the Obsidian Peak of stealing his property, claiming that Evelyn was a barren, cursed Omega who had manipulated a great Alpha. It was a pathetic, suicidal move, born from the toxic delusion that he still held power over her. A deadly silence fell over the crystal caverns. Kaelen's inner beast immediately rose to the surface, his claws extending as a low, rumbling growl vibrated through the stone floor, promising absolute slaughter. But before Kaelen could lunge, Evelyn placed a gentle, grounding hand on his thigh. She stood up slowly, the rustle of her silk gown echoing loudly in the quiet hall. She did not look angry, she looked profoundly disappointed, an expression that cut deeper than any blade. "I am no one's property, Damon, and I am far from cursed." With a subtle nod to the Obsidian Peak guards stationed at the entrance, the heavy doors opened once more. Two warriors escorted a trembling, frail figure into the center of the room. It was the chief healer of the Silver Ridge Pack. The man collapsed to his knees before the Alpha King, sobbing hysterically. Without any physical coercion, driven purely by the crushing guilt of what his lie had done to his territory and his soul, the healer confessed to everything. He detailed how Damon had bribed and threatened him into forging the medical decree to secure a wealthier alliance. He exposed the absolute rot at the core of Damon's leadership. The collective gasp from the gathered alphas was followed by a wave of furious disgust. In werewolf culture, falsifying a mate's medical standing to force a rejection is a crime against the moon goddess herself. It is an act of supreme cowardice. Damon spun around, looking desperately at his new allies, his pack members, his new mate, but he found only a wall of turned backs and bared teeth. His own people, the ones he had starved and oppressed, stepped away from him, officially severing their pack ties to a dishonored leader. The Alpha King stood, his voice thundering with absolute finality. He stripped Damon of his Alpha title, his lands, and his pack, sentencing him to live out the rest of his days as a rogue without a name. Damon collapsed to the stone floor, weeping, stripped of his ego, his wealth, and his dignity. He looked up at Evelyn, silently begging for the mercy she had once been so famous for. Evelyn walked down the steps, stopping just inches from the broken man who had once been her entire world. She looked down at him, feeling the life stirring miraculously within her own womb, a secret she and Kaelen had discovered only days prior. She was going to be a mother, carrying the heir to the Obsidian Peak. "You sentenced me to the winter, Damon, believing the cold would destroy me, but you forgot one crucial thing. I am the storm." She turned her back on him, walking away with a graceful, unhurried stride, returning to the side of the man who had loved her when she was nothing but a broken shell in the snow. Kaelen wrapped his arm around her, kissing the crown of her head, as the cavern erupted into murmurs of awe and respect. Damon was dragged out of the hall by the king's guards, screaming into the void, a forgotten memory swallowed by the darkness. This is the profound truth of our existence, my friends. Betrayal may shatter your foundation, and deceit may temporarily plunge you into the freezing dark. But true power is not found in the titles we hold or the lies we tell to puff up our chests. It is found in the quiet, agonizing courage to survive the night. Evelyn did not just survive the fire. She became the inferno that burned the old world down, paving the way for a dawn built on truth, unyielding strength, and a love so profound it healed the deepest scars of the soul. Thank you for walking this brutal, beautiful journey with Wolf King Stories. Until the next moon rises, stay fierce, stay true, and never let anyone extinguish your inner light.